Hello and welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us here today for Dr. Jeffrey Hibbert's talk as a part of Yaşar University Graduate Institute Seminar Series. Before I introduce you to our dear Jeff Hoca, I also would like to invite you all to our next talk this Thursday. That is the 29th of December. That will be 1 p.m. at 1 p.m. Please mark your calendars. The talk will be online again, and I shall send an invitation email for this tomorrow morning. And it will be Ahmet Hoca, Ahmet Süner, talking, and he will give a talk titled Antigone, Just Governance in the EU, the Value of Dialogical Reason or Phronesis. That will be the closing seminar of the semester and the year, of course, and all interested are welcome. So now I'll move on to Jeff's short bio. And Dr. Jeffrey Hibbert is an assistant professor in the Department of English Language and Literature at Yaşar University, which he joined in 2009. At Yaşar, he teaches courses ranging from 18th century literature to modern drama, as well as electives in modern drama and contemporary American cinema. Today, he will be reading the first paper he has ever written on a film. During the pandemic, Jeff Hibbert watched over 1,500 films, and his personal record is 7 films in one day, which he doesn't recommend. It was this time to slow down and watch closely that led him away from his previous way of thinking based on Adorno, that a film isn't bad, but that film as a medium is bad. He hopes that his example can show that changes in aesthetic attitudes are good. He has never seen the film Titanic, does not know how Harry Potter ends, me neither, Jeff, and the only Marvel movie he has seen is Guardians of the Galaxy. His current research interest is 21st century American horror films, especially those written and directed by women. The paper that he will read today is the first part of an intended series on narratives of women and the devil in the 21st century. Parts 2 and 3 will address historical narrative cinema and comedies about women who say yes to Satan. The floor is yours, Jeff Hoca, and thank you so much for being here today with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And it's very nice to be here with those of you who are here. It's always flattering when someone chooses to listen to you talk, especially when you talk for a living. And it's wonderful to be here in my house, which is for me a wonderful opportunity. And I hope that you are, well, I hope you have time, because it's kind of long paper, but it's not dauntingly long, but longer than let's say in the past these presentations have been. What I would like to do today is to just read this paper to you. I assume that very few of you have seen the film The Black Coat's Daughter, so I'm going to walk through that. I'm going to talk a little bit about an essay that Sigmund Freud wrote on what he called a case of demoniacal neurosis, which is a case of a man who had sold his soul to the devil, and then finish with a series of critiques of the film. So this paper is called Say Yes to Satan, American Women in 21st Century Horror Films. And this is part 1, The Black Coat's Daughter. I see in the future, part 2 will be The Witch and part 3, The Babysitter. So this is part 1, The Black Coat's Daughter. So here we go. Since its inception in 2007, the international reality television shows under the name Say Yes to the Dress have had over 277 episodes and have even been renewed for 2023. Before I continue, can you hear me and see me?
Yes.
Okay. Good to see you, Mom. Could you please turn off your microphone?
Okay.
Excellent. That's my mom, everybody. So to continue. According to Wikipedia, which is the most useful source of information for a non-topic like this, the program, quote, shows the progress of individual sales associates, managers, and fitters at Kleinfield Bridal in Manhattan, along with profiling brides as they search for the perfect wedding dress. They said yes.
I don't know how to turn off my microphone.
Maybe I should just skip to the conclusion.
I'm doing it right now.
Skipping to the conclusion?
No, I'm just muting everyone. But
Okay.
you. Yeah. I'm done. I'm done.
Okay. All right. Anyway, so in literary history, the most well-known yes is most likely that of Molly Bloom at the end of Ulysses, who in the last 7 words of the novel says, yes, I said yes, I will, yes. Though, whether here in her memory to whom she is saying yes is left purposefully and potently ambiguous. The power of affirmation, the power of assent, the power of agreement is at this moment in cultural history a paramount concern. One can even see in American Kitchen Kitsch the kindly affirmation that short circuits familial prohibitions in the decoration that says, when mommy says no, grandma says yes. There is a profound and constitutive significance to the affirmation, specifically in its relationship to the refusal set up by the form of law established in the resolution of the Oedipus complex. The assertion of no by the prohibiting father is, as Jacques Lacan has argued, not entirely a restriction placed around enjoyment, but the very foundation of the possibility of enjoyment itself. Without that constitutive no, there can never be the possibility of announcing other possible yeses. The talk that I'm offering today is based on a peculiar cultural shift from the last decades of the 20th century to the first decades of the 21st century. The rise of evangelical Christianity as a political force under Ronald Reagan's coalition of fiscal and religious conservatives brought out into popular culture a rampant fear that Satan, the embodiment of evil and the negation of Christianity, was alive and thriving in American public and private lives. From the airwaves, in suburban basements, in popular fiction and television, and in fashion logos and designs, the devil appeared to be everywhere. And America, as an assertively recrudescent Christian nation, needed to be alert to the perversions to moral hygiene embodied in its presence. In short, in the 1980s, as Nancy Reagan suggested, America just said no. How is it possible to see then within a generation the failure of the 1980s moral panic to retain its currency? Has Satan become less agonistic, less powerful, less attentive to American youth? Certainly the failure of anti-Satanist detectives and evangelical religious leaders to discover actual satanic cults led to its dismissal as a kind of crackpot conspiracy. It's nevertheless continued to morph into more pernicious and directly political crackpot conspiracies, such as the current QAnon, Pizzagate, and the paranoid cannibalistic fantasies of Alex Jones. Perhaps rather than being destroyed, the satanic moral panic has been transferred, or instead of transferred, condensed and displaced. It's within this general cultural network I would like to examine the rise of a new kind of American horror film and a new kind of American horror to which it attends. This is unlike William Friedkin's 1973 film, The Exorcist, in which the character of Regan, a 12-year-old daughter of an actress mother, is possessed by the devil, obviously without her approval. And though the character of Regan has, for several queer theory critics, been a figure who embodies a revolt against the hegemonic and heteronormative apparatuses of power in the 1970s, I think it's important to remember that the act of possession for the character was not a kind of liberation, but a kind of enslavement and torture. Within 40 years after The Exorcist, American cinema has returned to the subject of demonic possession in increasingly and explicitly non-hostile ways. Rather than deny, refuse, or reject Satan, the figure of Satan becomes a metaphor for liberation or a surrogate paternal figure. Neither of these is new to literary or psychoanalytic history. Percy Shelley and other Romantic era poets saw Satan as a metaphor for revolution, and Freud himself, as I'll discuss later, wrote an analysis on one case of what he called demoniacal possession. But what is of interest to me in this discussion is why women characters in 21st century American horror films say yes to Satan. In my discussion today, I'm limiting myself to a close reading of one film, which is Oz Perkins's 2015 film, The Black Coat's Daughter. Oz Perkins, as many of you know, is the son of Anthony Perkins, who played Norman Bates in Psycho. What I hope to show is that saying yes to Satan is not merely a way of transgressing the laws set up by the Catholic school, by heteronormative sex, or of what in the film are called conduct expectations, but as an act, it rewrites the subject's position within the social and symbolic order that it maintains for the sole purpose of possible transgressive pleasures. And there are 4 parts to this paper. This is now part 1, The Devil You Know. Unlike Friedkin's The Exorcist, Perkins's film presents a character who is willing to become possessed by Satan. She desires to make that connection, which is a kind of impossibility in Friedkin's universe. The main character, Kat, is a first-year student at an all-girls boarding school in New York called Bramford. And the name Bramford is important, and Oz Perkins confesses to have borrowed the name of the apartment building in Roman Polanski's 1968 film, Rosemary's Baby. The Bramford apartment is the building that Rosemary lives in. As the film opens, Kat dreams that she is visited by her father, who has come early to take her home for winter break. In her dream, her father is a shadowy figure in a long black coat, and his head is cut off at the top of the screen. He walks Kat into a snowy parking lot where he shows her burned and ruined a totaled car, suggesting that he and Kat's mother have been killed in a car accident on their way to take her to school. This dream is prophetic. It seems, though their deaths are never stated explicitly, that Kat's parents have been killed in an accident on their way to school. In the morning, Kat meets with Father Brian, who tells her that he will not be able to attend her piano concert that afternoon because he is called away to Albany on personal business. Kat's disappointment is masked by her peculiar smirking, which is noted by the priest. She says innocently, but with unconscious malice, "I mean, I just wish you could stay and see my performance." During her piano performance, Kat notices 2 empty chairs in the auditorium, suggesting her missing parents. Following the recital, she and a 4th-year student whose name is Rose, also in an intertextual homage to Polanski's Rosemary, sit in the office of the headmaster, Mr. Gordon, since they are the only 2 students whose parents have not claimed them for the break. Rose, unlike Kat, has told her parents the wrong day for the start of her vacation because she's pregnant and she wants to discuss this problem with her boyfriend. Mr. Gordon, who interprets Rose's explanation as a simple confusion of dates, asks Rose to look after Kat until her parents arrive, which he assumes will be soon. They will also be attended by the school's 2 nurses, Ms. Prescott and Ms. Drake. Mr. Gordon says that bad weather may be the cause of their delay and tells Kat everyone goes home and has a really nice break anyway. And with an avuncular smile and wink, he adds, "After all, we can't let you live here." And that's going to be an important part for the second part of this paper. Mr. Gordon asks Rose to look after Kat until her parents arrive, but Rose is loath to do so since she has alternative plans. Rose says she hasn't been feeling well, plans to stay in bed. And up to this point, there have not been 1, but four refusals or deferrals of attention or care to Kat. Her own parents' absence, the departure of Father Brian, Mr. Gordon's decree that she can't live there, and Rose's disinclination to look after her. In the following scene, Rose tells Kat, "You know I'm not babysitting you tonight, right, freshman? Don't touch my shit," as Kat watches her brush her hair from the doorway. She mocks Kat for repeating Mr. Gordon's request that she watch over her. At this moment, Rose tells Kat that the sisters wear wigs because they have burned off all their hair, worshiping the devil. Rose departs to meet her boyfriend, and Kat does indeed touch her shit. She picks up her hairbrush and examines it. She then picks up her class photo and runs her thumbnail under the line of Rose's chin. At this point in the film, Perkins leaves this storyline for another involving a young woman waiting at an abandoned bus stop in the cold, trying to reach Bramford. A man approaches and offers her a ride, though his car is parked farther down the road in a shadowy area. He tells her that his wife is in the car and they're heading in her direction. The buildup of red flags is ultimately a misdirection. He introduces himself as Bill, and she introduces herself as Joan. Bill's wife is indeed in the car and leery that he has picked up a stray girl. There is a cut. In another temporal edit, Rose returns to the school dorm to hear Kat's voice through the bathroom radiator. The sound that comes up through the radiator is Kat's voice saying, "Sounds good." Rose follows the source of the sound to the basement. In the basement boiler room, she sees Kat on her knees, bowing 3 times impossibly fast to the burning furnace. A jump cut takes us back to Joan in a motel room where she stands before a mirror, revealing a bullet wound scar on her back, followed by a flashback of her being shot by a policeman's bullet. Bill enters the room, and when she asks why he is helping, he says he believes he is doing the work of God. Quote, "In the unlikely things that happen, little coincidences. You reminded me so much of someone I haven't seen in a long time." Then there is a cut back to Kat in bed. Rose asks her if she was sleepwalking in the boiler room. Kat repeats that, quote, "Mr. Gordon said you were supposed to look after me." At this moment, Rose is less brash in acknowledging the role that she abandoned. Kat says, "Now it's too late," to Rose's confusion. Kat says that her parents are dead, and Rose is shocked at her outrageousness. "You smell pretty," Kat tells Rose. Rose then asks Kat if there's anything she can do, but Kat smiles and says, "No, you had your chance." Rose locks and blocks her own bedroom door. Meanwhile, in Kat's room, Kat's body contorts into an impossible, inhuman position under the sheet, the first indication that she is no longer the only inhabitant of her body. Perkins cuts back to the story of Joan meeting Bill in a late-night restaurant. He tells Joan that his daughter was killed 9 years ago tomorrow at Bramford, and he goes there every year to lay flowers at the school. He shows a picture of Rose to Joan. Joan excuses herself and goes to the bathroom. In a series of flashbacks, it's revealed that Joan is not Joan at all, but an escapee from a prison mental hospital who has killed a woman named Joan and stolen her identity. Joan laughs in the bathroom at her great fortune of having met Rose's parents. And we as an audience realize that Joan is in fact Kat. Joan and Kat are the same person, but Joan is Kat 9 years later. Perkins's clever deception involves using 2 different actresses to play the character in the 9 years difference. Back in the car, Bill's wife Linda tells Joan that Bill frequently has picked up young stray girls on their pilgrimage to honor their daughter. Linda is repulsed by it. She tells Joan blankly, but menacingly, quote, "You don't look anything like her. It's strange. I can't see you at all," in a negation of her presence. Cut back to Bramford 9 years ago. Kat hangs up a telephone in the hallway and tells Rose, quote, "He said it's all right. He says I can't live here, but I can with him." Rose asks, "Who's he?" Kat responds, "You know who." She focuses on Rose. "Mr. Gordon, silly. He's the headmaster. She says again to Rose, you smell pretty. In the next scene, Kat is at dinner with Rose and the sisters. Kat refuses to say grace when prompted by one of them. When forced, she stands and vomits, and then is taken to the school infirmary. She is physically transforming. Her hair is disheveled. Red circles appear under her eyes. Her skin has turned an oily brown. Excuse me. When examined by the sisters, Kat's voice is altered. It's lowered. And she says, take your hands off me, cunt. They are shocked, but interrupted by a phone call. And Kat repeats, he really did say he'd come. He'll come and say he was wrong. This time he'll say that I can live here. He's the headmaster. Apparently the call was from Mr. Gordon, and he'll be arriving this afternoon. We assume that he'll tell Kat that her parents are dead. In a temporal cut, Mr. Gordon arrives with the police, but finds 2 dead and beheaded bodies in the sisters' home. Perkins cuts here and restarts the day before, but from a new point of view. As Kat lays in the bathtub, the silhouette of Satan appears on the linoleum. She then makes a phone call to her parents, but they don't answer. Instead, an ominous and distorted voice says, hi, baby girl, Catherine, they aren't coming. Kill the cunts. In the following montage, Kat eats lunch alone and cries before taking the stage at her recital. She is again at Rose's door listening to the story of the sisters' hairlessness, but this time she sees the silhouette of the devil on the wall. Rose leaves with her boyfriend and Kat answers the phone. It says to her, you can stay here with me. The film now cuts back to the murder of the sisters and Catherine's beheading of their bodies. The film cuts again at this point as Rose in the bathroom appears to have had her period and is relieved that she is not pregnant. As she leaves the bathroom, she sees the 2 pillowcases containing the heads of the sisters set down by the front door. She recoils in terror and is stabbed and beheaded by Kat. Cut back to Mr. Gordon and the police officer at the sisters' house discovering the bodies. Following the trail of blood to the boiler room, the officer sees Kat kneeling next to the boiler with the 3 heads next to her. He charges her to drop the knife she is holding. She steps into the light where she says in a distorted voice, hail Satan, hail Satan. As she screams, the officer shoots her in the spot we previously saw the bullet wound on Joan. Cut back to Joan in Bill and Linda's car. The couple argues to the point where Bill pulls over, at which point Joan stabs them both, beheads them, puts their heads in their luggage, and begins to clean the blood from her face. Perkins cuts back to Kat, restrained in a hospital bed. Father Brian visits her, looks deep into her eyes and says, presumably to Satan, there you are. You are not wanted here. I say you will go from this place. You will leave here. You will leave this poor girl and you will never come back. At this moment, the audio performance of the exorcism is played over Joan's approach to the now closed and apparently long abandoned Branford School. The 2 scenes, the exorcism of the devil and Joan's return to Branford, are intercut. Father Brian commands the devil to leave this girl and never come back as her body levitates above the bed. When she falls again to the mattress, Kat sees Satan's figure by the wall and says, don't go. Very different from The Exorcist. In a cut back to Joan, she approaches the boiler room with the heads of Rose's parents to find that it is long dormant, that her tribute will not be received, that the devil has been exorcised not only from her, but from Branford, and that Branford has disappeared from the world. She walks out into the snow-covered street, and the film ends with her screaming into the emptiness of this frozen world. Thank you for bearing with me through that rather lengthy description. Part 2, what's your name? Who's your daddy? The film stages a relationship between a Catholic schoolgirl and Satan, wherein the student chooses demonic possession as a means of creating a surrogate family for herself, as well as a locus or a site for her own possible coming into being. Accepting the devil's offer then enables a network of possibilities that were heretofore unavailable to her. A father figure, unlike the priest or the headmaster, and even unlike Bill as he offered himself to Joan. So if, in the first instance, what Kat wants is a place to stay, this begs the question. Why would she want to stay in such a bereft and denuded place, from which she has been alienated as well as condemned? This always reminds me of that Woody Allen joke. You know, the food here is really terrible. I know, in such small portions. Like, why would you want larger portions if the food is so bad? By staying at the school, Kat may achieve a victory over Mr. Gordon's comment, quote, "We can't let you stay here," end quote, as well as the potential to exercise her revenge on those who have abandoned her or denied her the care she demanded. Effectively, she wants to occupy a site that has been forbidden to her by the headmaster, to transgress one of the laws it has established. The figure of the, quote, headmaster is doubled. The figure of Mr. Gordon and Satan become conflated in Kat's speech when she announces he's the headmaster. When we elide the letters in the name Mr. Gordon, we find Mr. God in there. The devil in the furnace is a dark duplicate of Mr. God. He is a new and perverse headmaster whose injunction reverses the one given by his law-giving correlative, which he nevertheless maintains as the function. I see in the doubling of Mr. Gordon and Satan what Lacan calls the dialectical relationship between desire and law, which causes our desire to flare up only in relation to the law. It is only because of the law that sin takes on an excessive hyperbolic character. What Satan makes possible is not merely a reverse of what Mr. Gordon has offered, i.e., not you can stay here, but rather you can violate the law because now there is a law to violate. Without the dialectic of Mr. Gordon and Satan, the injunction, you can stay here, would mean nothing. It gains its fullest consequences when staying here becomes possible and fundamentally transgressive. In 1923, Sigmund Freud wrote an essay entitled A 17th Century Demoniacal Neurosis. It is a reading of a manuscript prepared by the priests of the shrine of St. Lambert in Mariazell near Vienna in 1729, about 40 years after an event in which a local painter named Christoph Heismann went to the shrine begging for protection from the devil, with whom he had made a pact 9 years earlier. Every pact with the devil needs a cause, what Freud calls an exciting cause, a cause that excites it. From the Faustian bargain, Freud believes that, quote, the devil has many things to offer which are highly prized by man: wealth, security from danger, power over mankind and the forces of nature, and above all else, enjoyment. The enjoyment of beautiful women, end quote. Heismann, however, wanted none of these things. Since his father had recently died, Heismann had fallen into, quote, melancholic depression with an inhibition in his work and justified fears about his future, end quote. What Heismann wrote in his Deal with the Devil is this, quote, I, Christoph Heismann, sign a bond with this Satan to be his bounden son, and in the 9th year to belong to him body and soul. For Freud, Heismann's wish from the devil was not directly to cure his penury or allay his melancholy, but to be his son for the period of 9 years. This case leads Freud to ask several questions that are in line with the questions that I'm asking of Blackcoat's daughter. Why does Heismann want a father substitute? Why does he choose the devil to be his father substitute? Why does he make not one, but 2 different bonds with Satan? And why does he choose the duration of 9 years to be his son? To the first part of this question, Heismann's desire for a father substitute is built from his melancholy at the loss of his beloved father. Why he chooses the devil, Freud answers, is a result of an ambivalent attitude towards his own father. He loves him, and he fears his love of him. The hostility and defiance he feels towards his own father is formed through a fear of his libidinal attachment to his father in the form of love. Freud generalizes and suggests the ambivalence toward God the Father may be the source of the creation of Satan, which is not an unreasonable claim. The more he mourned for his father, the more his attitude toward him bore the stamp of ambivalence, he writes. The matter of two separate bonds with Satan is a complex and laborious one, but Freud concludes that the failure of the first exorcism to obtain a satisfactory result led Heisman to invent a second bond from which he is finally and successfully delivered. It's a really laborious part of the essay. As for the 9-year period of filial obligation, Freud reads this as the reemergence of Heisman's long-repressed childhood fantasy to bear a child for his father. The choice of the devil, then, is a form of debasing the image of his father in his fantasy life, evidenced by Heisman's various paintings of Satan with the breasts of a woman and a penis with the head of a snake. So what became of Christoph Heisman? And again, this is 150, almost 200 years before Freud is working, even older than that. After one failed and one successful exorcism, he entered the monastery and lived as a monk for the rest of his life. For Freud, this is not a radical change, but rather a slide from the devil as father substitute to the fathers of the church as father substitute. Heisman's struggles likely did not end where his narrative ends. For Freud, Heisman must continually struggle, quote, between his libidinal enjoyment of life and his realization that the interests of self-preservation called imperatively for renunciation and asceticism, end quote. What perhaps is most illuminating about Freud's reading of Heisman's case history is not that Heisman's decision to give his body and soul to the devil was irrational, but that the internal logic of Heisman's unconscious and his practical needs for subsistence made this a reasonable, though ultimately fantastic practice. What did Heisman receive for 9 years? However unhappy he may have been, he seems to have cured himself of his excessive melancholy, painted, and found a means to live, all the things that he had feared he'd not be able to do. No, Freud does not suggest this as a good strategy, but rather explains how the mechanism of the bargain worked and how the exorcism ultimately created a Catholic father from the devil's son. Part 3, you can stay here or everyone knows this is nowhere. Now that I've taken you through the film and provided a parallel historical analysis from Freud, I want to raise several questions that I hope I can answer. Obviously, I hope I can answer them. How does Kat, for example, through her dream, know that her parents are dead before anyone else? How does Kat's relationship with Rose transform her? If she is already transformed by the time she meets Rose, is she already transformed by the time she meets Rose? What is Kat's relationship to Joan? And what is Joan's relationship to Rose's parents? And most importantly, what does Kat want from Satan? And what does Satan want from Kat? How is demonic possession different from the Faustian bargain? And how is the difference significant? Finally, what might be the larger historical and cultural significance of the willingly possessed woman in the early 20th century? As Oz Perkins explains in his running commentary to the Blu-ray edition of this film, the original title of this film was February, and it was immediately disliked by the potential distributors of the film. They clearly had a horror movie to market, but weren't sure to whom or how to pitch a film simply named after a month. The Black Coat's Daughter, the title upon which the creative and promotional teams finally agreed, is interesting because a black coat is an example of a synecdoche that refers to a member of the clergy, the preacher's daughter, for instance. In its shift from February to the Black Coat's Daughter, The film title performs the same kind of shift between Cat and Joan, or as I have suggested, Mr. Gordon and Satan. This kind of doubling, though in itself not representative of an uncanny presence, nevertheless performs as if it were. The opening shot of the man in a black coat walking Cat to a destroyed car in her dream is an ambivalent figure, caught between her own father, displaying his and his wife's death to his daughter, and Satan displaying her parents' death to her. In repeated viewings of the film, I've adjusted my initial argument that Cat's first interaction with Satan was in the boiler room. This is not of interest to you, but it's greatly of interest to me, to see that her first interaction with Satan, I think, is in the dream. This explains why the silhouette of the devil is on the linoleum when she takes a bath that morning. It also explains her wry and impertinent body language in her meeting with Father Brian, as well as adds a malevolent doubleness to her disappointment that he won't stay and see her performance. The narrative of Cat is the primary axis of the film, but it's not the only one. The axis of Rose intersects with Cat's at multiple points and multiply significant ways. Rose is older, she's shrewder and wilier than Cat. She is deceitful in a way that prioritizes her desires. She is more confidently mocking and supercilious. Like Cat, Rose's parents will not pick her up for the holiday, but this is because Rose has deceived them about the day. Unlike Cat, Rose is a sexually active young woman who is disguising her pregnancy from her school and her family. Unlike Cat, Rose is not looking for surrogates or supplements to her familial organization. She is rather in the process of supplanting it. Cat's attachment to Rose is likewise ambivalent. On the one hand, she looks to Rose as a kind of maternal, or at least sisterly surrogate who denies her. At the same time, there are suggestions of Cat's libidinal investment in Rose, her longing look at her hairbrush, her gaze at the photo, and the final shot of Cat gathering Rose's hair as she prepares to dismember her. A queer analysis of the film by Alex Hall entitled, quote, "You Smell Pretty, Satanic Lesbianism in Blackcoat's Daughter," end quote, another great title, suggests somewhat overconfidently that Rose is the erotic attachment of Cat. That Cat may have caused the termination of Rose's pregnancy, that Cat possesses a, quote, unkempt sapphism from Rose, and a, quote, solidarity with the sisters in queer kinship, unquote. This reading is exciting, but I think it's too eager to see Cat cast off patriarchy without considering the ways in which that order is a necessary precondition for her to take pleasure in transgressional acts. Further, there's a rather spurious reading that Cat, quote, stroked the clean, glossy surface of a yearbook photograph of Rose. In this particular scene, Cat's thumbnail clearly moves across Rose's neck in a manner that is as homicidal as it is erotic. I don't, however, want to abandon the reading of Cat as a queer character, but to suggest that her queerness is by no means unambiguous, emancipating, or jubilant. Instead, I read Cat's desire for Rose more along the line of Freud's reading of Heisman's ambivalence towards her father. Her libidinal attachment to Rose is met with an equal repulsion at her own desire, multiplied by Rose's indifference to Cat and her repudiation of Cat as a prospective surrogate child. By insinuating that the sisters are closet Satanists, Rose does not frighten as much as perplex and potentially titillate Cat regarding Satan, not herself. Cat's ambivalence is not merely psychological. Perkins's great conceit in the film is employing the two actresses, Kiernan Shipka and Emma Roberts, to play Cat and Joan. The 9 years that separate Cat from Joan likely unintentionally mirror the 9 years Heisman held the devil as his father, but the suggestion that she was ready to be reborn or that she was desperate to maintain the contract diverges widely from Heisman's case. While he wanted to be saved from his bargain, Joan wants the bargain to finally and fully mature. Hence, the meeting with Bill and Linda is not just fortuitous, but prophetic. Bill, who is searching for a surrogate daughter, and Linda, who refutes every one of the possibles, cannot be Joan's surrogate primarily because simply she already has one. They appear to her as the sisters did and as Rose did. They are not objects of unequivocal affection, but the very limit that must be transgressed in order to return to her demonic duplicate and headmaster. Joan's post-possession condition is one she is trying to repeat and reclaim. To become one again with Satan is for her a return to a kind of infancy. The bargain she makes with Satan is not explicitly for a father and never has been. Instead, it has been for a surrogate who can enable her to transgress the law. There is a conflation in the film between possession and the Faustian bargain. Possession generally is assumed to be involuntary, as in the case dramatized by The Exorcist, or it can be voluntary, as in the case of more recent films like Hereditary, Relic, or The Exorcism of Emily Rose. The Faustian bargain may be manipulative, but it's always voluntary. One makes a quasi-legal deal with the devil in exchange for goods and services. The great parody of this bargain is in The Simpsons, in which Homer sells his soul to the devil for a donut, and Marge successfully argues that the devil cannot take Homer's soul since it legally belongs to Marge. In regard to the film, what, if anything, does Kat exchange of herself for Satan's cohabitation? She has been told to bring the heads of the others at the school, but nothing of herself. Can't we ask this of all forms of the deal with the devil? Aren't they all forms of extreme narcissism to suggest that our soul has exchange value and that somebody, specifically Satan, would want it? It may suggest a brutal and fundamentally traumatic fact for the character of Kat, which she must repress, that there is nothing in Kat herself of value to the devil. A counter-argument may be levied by noting that giving what you don't have is precisely the Lacanian formula for love in his seminar on transference. However, if we consider Satan as an intertextual figure, I think of Goethe's Mephistopheles telling Faust that he is the, quote, spirit of perpetual negation. Then presenting nothing to the spirit of negation is literally multiplying 0 times 0. You give nothing, and it is returned to you magnified. What ultimately does Kat or Joan want? The answer to this, I believe, is announced multiple times in the film, but none more forcefully than the proclamation, "You can stay here." The first 2 words of the statement, "you can," are not the words of the subject's id, but the words of the superego. As Lacan argues in his first seminar, quote, "The superego is at one and the same time the law and its destruction. The law is reduced to something which cannot even be expressed like you must, which is speech deprived of all its meaning," end quote. For Lacan, the superego is a ferocious figure that is linked to primitive, quote, primitive traumas the child has suffered, wherever these are, end quote. As Slavoj Žižek has written in his essay on David Lynch's Lost Highway, it is the figure of the obscene father who sets forth the possibility that enjoyment as such exists. The function of the obscene father is to be taken absolutely seriously, Žižek argues, since, quote, they are not obeyed as an authentic paternal authority. They are physically hyperactive, hectic, exaggerated, and therefore, and as such, already inherently ridiculous figures through whom the law is enforced. I don't want to argue that Kat is looking to be restrained by the regulatory procedures of power, We see this, of course, in the flashbacks that she has as she struggles against the doctors and the nurses in the mental hospital. But the very existence of law and authority are the necessary conditions of breaking it. You can does not, in my reading, evacuate language. It does not move from the field of the symbolic into the field of experience beyond language, but rather it's the first and only command she receives that is compatible with her subjective agency. The second two words, stay here, are in conflict with the first two, since you can suggest an agency beyond the law, while the second, stay here, is the limit of the law itself. What happens when you stay here? Whatever it is, you can do it. And it is the pouring out of her desire. This is the transaction erased by the exorcism of Father Brian near the end of the film. This lends weight to Father Brian's command, you will leave here. He is not merely casting out Satan, he is banishing Catherine as well. For what Cat Joan have wanted is the site for the purpose of transgressing it. The closing of the school in the time between the first murders and Joan's return is the ultimate voiding. Satan has left the school because there is no order remaining to disobey. The film's concluding moment of Joan screaming in the middle of a barren Winter Street stages a confrontation with her most inescapable and distressing trauma. There is nothing. Without Bramford, without Satan, without her family, without Rose, without Mr. Gordon, without Father Brian, she is alone, alert only to the void of her own solipsism. And now, part 4, the conclusion, I call the scream. By the end of the film, 4 women and 1 man have been killed and mutilated. This is a despicable crime, and no amount of sentimental feeling for the aggrieved cat can make us sympathetic with what she hath wrought. But if we read this metaphorically, as I think we should do, it's easy to see how the rage and fury of this young woman connects with the mythologies of Satan as a pernicious and destructive figure. There is considerable ethical complexity in saying yes to Satan, but remaining on the plane of metaphoricity, the satanic yes is the grounding of a new subjectivity, even though it is ephemeral, recontrolled, and rewritten in the law of Father Brian. What it offers is not a permanent unification with the darker energies of her being, but at least the acknowledgement that they exist. I read the scream and despondency at the end of the film as the scream of a newborn, a subject that is awake now to its inscrutability to others, as much as its inaccessibility to itself. Rather than being accused of being pessimistic, I would iterate that these are the conditions on which any subjectivity is created and experienced. In the film, what the Cat-Joan relationship with Satan has shown is that we may be swarmed by the presence of others, but are radically and unshakably alone. Thank you for staying with me. It's been a pleasure, and I would entertain any questions or comments that you might have.
Jeff, thank you so much for this wonderful, wonderful talk. I really like your reading, although I'm not into horror films, actually. I, for one, have a question. Can you comment on the maybe relationship between, of course, the first thing that your talk reminded me of was Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus. What do you think about the connection there? Do you think Cat would regret this decision to say yes to Satan if she had enough time with Satan? Sorry.
One of the things that I'm still working through, and thank you for your question, one of the things that I'm still working through is the kind of anhedonic character that she is, that she's a character seemingly without the experience of joy or the experience of pleasure. And this is the interesting thing to make in comparison with Faust, because what Faust wants, he doesn't want more knowledge. He's, according to, as far as I remember, Faust says, I've gone as far as knowledge can take me. What I want are the more baser things in life. You know, I want sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And what's interesting to me is the case of Heisman, the case of Kat in this film. They don't want sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So for my reading, what did she really want from the devil? Like I said, like she just wanted something very childish, something very basic, which is also very complex, which is she wanted someone to fill a kind of role for her that would keep her locked into the kind of Oedipal struggle that gives her access to enjoyment and pleasure. The problem I'm having with my own reading at this point is, what is she enjoying? And the answer with this character is that she doesn't enjoy anything.
Yeah, I think
so
it's an escape, right? It's an escape, perhaps.
Yeah, certainly for me it is, yeah.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much.
Sure, thank you.
Before moving on to questions, I want to read the messages here. Catherine has sent some applause for you. And Fatime says, what a beautiful reading, learned so much. And Zehra Selin Tunca says, thank you, Jeff Hocam. Now, if there are questions, please feel free to just join or turn your camera on and join us. Trevor Hocam? We can't hear you.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Hi, Trevor.
Hello. Thank you very much, Jeff. I enjoyed that very much.
Thank you.
I haven't seen the film, and so I might have got lost in some of the details, but I had one question again. It may be that this is something that I failed to pick up on in your reading. So my question actually has nothing to do with the devil at all, but it has to do with the significance of Rose's supervisory function, right? Mm-hmm. It seems to me that an awful lot hinges on that. And there's a kind of double delegation, right? On the one hand, Mr. Gordon delegates his supervisory function to her. On the other hand, it also seems that she occupies the delegated role of Kat's parents in their absence. So I wondered if you had more to say about that. First of all, it seems to me that the missing, that supervisory role, especially bearing in mind the function of the missing parents, might also have something to do with the way in which the spectators of the film are drawn into its fantasy structure, right? So obviously there's a reference to an audience there. But I'm also wondering about the possibility that part of the aggression centered around Kat in the film actually has to do with Rose possibly, I mean, again, I haven't seen the film, so I wonder what you think about this. Possibly some of that aggression and violence has something to do with Rose's inability, precisely as a woman, adequately to embody the supervisory and prohibitive superego. And one thing that comes to mind is quite a long time ago now, I read what I think is a very clever essay by Julia Crete about the psychodynamics of feminism. It's called The Daughter of the Movement, and she analyzes the rage of a generation of feminist lesbians in the 1980s and 1990s, to a large extent, the rage directed at an earlier generation of radical feminists, specifically anti-SM radical feminists. But Crete's argument in the end is that the rage isn't about the prohibitive or moralistic element of the anti-SM argument. She argues that in the end, these mother figures of feminism are raged at by the daughters of the movement, precisely once again for their inability structurally to occupy the role of the superego within a patriarchal conception that role. So I don't know if
Well, I like that.
makes sense at all, but
I like that argument very much. But yes, it's useful. I like the way that you've worded that for me. I think that you're exactly right in saying that it's Rose's inability, and I would say that for the character of Kat, not only that she wants this older girl to take that role, but she thinks that this girl can take that role, that it's actually possible for her to do so. And so when she doesn't, it's less of inability as it is an unwillingness to exercise it. And it becomes almost a kind of sadistic practice of saying, I can do this for you, but I'm not going to. You know that I'm not going to babysit you, right, freshman? That's the only term that she gives it. And as she says that, because this scene is repeated, the first time she says it, the camera is looking at Kat from Rose's point of view. About a half hour later, it's looking at Rose from Kat's point of view, and behind her on the wall is the silhouette of Satan. So there is in that moment, I would say absolutely yes. When Rose says, I'm not going to do it for you. When mom says no, grandma says yes, I think this is the same kind of situation that what she's saying is, yeah, I want you to fulfill this role for me. And the frustration, the rage becomes, you have refused to do so. So now I refuse. Actually, she would say, I would refuse to be cared for by you. So there's a kind of double negation there. But yeah, I hope that answers your question, because I really like that idea about the non-prohibitive character.
I have a question.
Please, Catherine.
So I was curious about the allusions to other horror films. You mentioned Rosemary's Baby and I think Psycho and some other films. I'm curious about how those allusions impact the kind of gender dynamics you're describing in the film, and if it tends to like empower the women, or what those allusions are doing is what I'm curious about.
That's a great question too, Catherine. I especially like Rosemary's Baby as the touchstone for this film, because Rosemary, the character of Rosemary, may be the first character in film who says yes to Satan. And primarily because Satan is both the father of her son and now her son itself. So I think of all the films, I would say that Blackcoat's Daughter is in a way a rejection of The Exorcist. And it is definitely a kind of allegorical child of Rosemary's Baby, in terms of a character like Mia Farrow's Rosemary, who throughout I'm sorry, I've just ruined Rosemary's Baby for everybody now, but the great twist at the ending is that after an entire kind of cat and mouse game of Rosemary trying to find out how the Satanists operate and how they have deceived her, finally says yes, she acquiesces to her role as the mother of the devil. So definitely Rosemary's Baby. There are few other films recently. Now, the film Hereditary is not, it's not about demonic possession, but it's kind of a cult in which characters, again, say yes to their role within the cult. I think that what's interesting to me is how the 21st century horror film has more and more a kind of willingness, as opposed to the past where there has been always the character running from the object of terror. This is something that I think about more and more, is as kind of embracing it.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
I would add that the Australian film, The Babadook, is probably a great example of just accepting the evil that is in you. I don't know if you have seen that one, but that is high on my list of great horror films, directed by an Australian woman.
Cool. Oh, it's really neat. Thanks, Jeff.
Sure.
I was going to ask you something, Jeff, but you already answered somehow.
Was it good?
Because I saw Rosemary's Baby, but not the film you about, and I just thought that there might be something about 1960s that make these characters to say yes to Satan. So I thought maybe it has something to do with the time the films were made. Do you think that's the case, or because you mentioned in the 21st century there are more and more saying yes to Satan and they accept it somehow? I thought that's also something to do with this the liberation movements in 1960s and food in 1970s, maybe. I don't know. Anything you want to add? Something?
Yeah, sure. I think of the 1980s as a kind of culminating response to the kind of exuberance of the 1960s. And I think of Reagan and Bush 1 era America as a period of increasing fanaticism, and the way in which a lot of American discourse was filtered through a kind of evangelical language. A lot of political discourse is filtered through an evangelical language. And I see, for example, and this is something that I am examining closer in 1980s horror films, but in 1980s horror films, there is still this kind of banal resolution of conflict in a way that Reagan's America has set right the exuberance of the 60s. I may be making kind of a simplification straw man here, but I'm just talking off the top of my head. I like these 21st century films because I see them really historically as a response to that period of evangelized political discourse of the 1980s, that it's kind of post-panic, that the things that we should be afraid of are not the metaphors of the devil, but that we should be afraid of the people who are preaching against it. And that I find to be politically very savvy and important.
I like that post-panic. Yeah, I agree with you.
There are certain things that I don't want to say because I know they're illegal in Turkey to say about the position of certain religious leaders and their relationship to crime and evil things. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there another question? Any other questions?
I just had a quick question. Does my paycheck for this talk go directly direct deposit, or do I have to come in and get it?
I don't have the answer to that, Jeff. Sorry. I wish I did.
We all know the answer to that.
So thank you again, Jeff, for this wonderful talk. And thank you, everybody, for joining us here today before the year starts.